Okay. All right. All right. Well, as I said, thank you everybody for joining us for this getting started with hand stripping webinar. The goal here is to help you figure out if hand stripping is something you're really interested in, and whether it's something that your dog has a suitable coat for, or if it's something that you want to pursue, something you want to learn more about. One of the first things that's important to know about hand stripping is it's a time-consuming process, and not so much on the day, although it can be, but it takes time to see the results. So it's not like when you're scissoring a poodle or something like that, where you brush them and then you scissor them and you get your results right away. It's going to be some time before you can see the results really that you're getting. This is Sumo. He's an 18-month-old standard. He's getting a little shaggy, so he's going to be my example. Give me a second. I'm going to see if I can change my view a little bit. Oh, thank you, Sumo. Because I'm not seeing myself. There we go. Now I can see myself better. I can see what you guys are seeing a little better. So Sumo's a show dog, so he has to be hand stripped. And the reason that we hand strip the show dogs is because dog shows are a demonstration of breeding stock, and they're supposed to represent and be able to do the tasks that they were originally bred for. And standard Schnauzers were originated in Bavaria, so very mountainous, hard winters, a lot of hard weather. So their jacket, this hard coat, it has to be weatherproof. It has to shed rain. It has to shed snow. They have to be able to work in the wet all day and not get all wet. So a hard coat with thick strands is essential to that. A nice undercoat underneath. It's kind of like wearing a parka in the wintertime. And so since we need to show them in the condition so that the judge can assess that the coat is correct, we have to maintain the hand stripped coat. For a lot of people with their pets, that's a lot more work than they want to put into it, or they can't find somebody who can do hand stripping for them, and those dogs just get clippered, and that softens the coat over time. And that's why sometimes we definitely can't use them for show unless we bring the coat back if they've been clippered. He's a salt and pepper salt. You can see he's a mixture of dark and light. When they've been clippered, they tend to go to a uniform gray color. Even a black Schnauzer will go to a uniform color all over when they've been clippered. And so part of why people want to keep them hand stripped is to keep this really distinctive, characteristic look as well. So what do we do? How do we do this? I've broken down basic hand stripping into, I call it a 3T framework. There's timing, there's technique, and there's tools. All three of them are really important, and you're not going to be able to get very far in your process if you don't pay attention to all of them. The one that gets overlooked the most is timing. There's both timing in terms of when you pull the coat, how long does it take to grow back in? So is it a planning process, especially if you're getting ready to show? Timing in terms of how long do you spend in a given session with your dog, so that neither of you dislikes the process too much. So one of the fundamental pieces of information to know is that when you strip the hair, just like this. When it comes out, it takes 6 weeks to sprout again, on average, most Schnauzers. Some other breeds, the hair grows a little faster, a little slower, even individuals within the breed. But after having worked with just dozens and dozens of standard Schnauzers and other Schnauzers over the years, the average is 6 weeks. So any hair that I pull today won't even sprout through the surface of the skin for 6 weeks. So that's why we have to be patient about the process and not try to expect instant results and expect to suddenly go from a shaggy dog, you know, to one who we see in a picture and we say, oh, that's what I want my dog to look like, is short and even all over. So 6 weeks. Another important aspect to that I talk about in some of my other courses or other programs is it grows at different speeds on different parts of the dog. It grows the fastest on the head and on the tail here. And that's why he's got a bushy little rabbit tail right now, because it grows pretty fast and I haven't maintenance as much. It grows next fastest on the rear, the neck, and the shoulders. And where it grows the slowest is here in the middle, right? So that's why if you have been stripping your dog at home and you strip all of the coat at one time, that would be why, if you've had the question of why is it that by the time this comes in, his head, neck, and shoulders and his rear, they're all bushy already. Or, well, when these areas, the front and the back look good, the middle's still too short. It's because they grow at different rates. So timing ultimately is very important to your results. And the best way you can keep track of it is on a calendar. Now you can just keep a wall calendar or a little day planner or week to week planner, but you need to keep notes and you need to make a note on the calendar on the days where you do work, because I have told myself so many times, oh, I'll remember when I did that work. I'll remember when I need to do the next thing. And then a month later, do I remember it? No, because I'm human and it's too many things to keep in my head. So one of the things that I've done is I've created a planner specifically for this. And Andy is going to put a link to that planner in the chat, which you can copy and you can access. And I'll also include it in the replay, in the comments of the replay. So if you don't catch it now, don't worry about it. But that planner, it's a PDF of just 1 month. So you'd print out multiple months, keep them in a folder or a binder or something like that. And you can start to see the ebb and flow of the coat. You can also start to be able to plan, because planning is such an important part of timing. If we only strip them when we feel like it, then we're going to get inconsistent results. But if we have a particular goal in mind, and we can block off on our planner what day we're going to spend an hour, what day we're going to spend 20 minutes, overall, you're going to see better results faster because you were paying attention to the time interval that you're working. So the planner is my gift to you. And the more that you can use it, at first it's awkward. You're like, why am I writing down that I worked for 5 minutes? But over time, you will find being able to look back. When did I do that thing? When did I strip the head? When did I strip the tail? When did I do something? Being able to go back and look it up really is going to help you to be able to predict your future outcomes. Now, the other part of timing, like I said, is the time on the table. If you have a young and inexperienced dog, or you're inexperienced yourself, neither of you has the stamina for hours of work. You just don't. And the thing that you most want to avoid if you're going to try to do hand stripping is to turn them off on it right away. And the number one way to turn them off on it right away is to do too much at one time. He's funny. If I'm not paying attention to him, you know, he's trying to get my attention. So I just thank him for his for his anticipation. And he's pretty cooperative at this point because I use this strategy I'm going to show you. So this is just a timer. And when I start out with a dog and I'm just starting out, I set the timer for 5 minutes. And I don't work longer than that without taking a break. And I also maybe have some treats handy, something like that to break it up and make it nice for them. And I set my goal before I start. What am I going to do today? So like what I want to show you today in terms, when we get to the next T, which is technique, is I'm going to show you some techniques for stripping the head, stripping the tail, how to get started. I'm going to kind of assume that you have a shaggy dog and that, you know, you're trying to get that under control. You're trying to see what you're going to be able to do with that. Also, some of these techniques will work if you have had a clipper dog. You might be able to bring the coat back if it's a hard enough coat and it hasn't been clippered for too long. I'll show you some techniques for that also. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions about timing? If you do, if you can raise your Zoom hand, then I'll know that you've got a question and I can address it. And if nobody has any questions about the timing, then I'll go ahead and address some of the teaching points about using the correct techniques that you need for hand stripping. No? Okay, I'll go on into techniques. So when you first start, the habit that I really encourage everyone to get is to learn to just finger pluck. It's a slow way of going, but when you finger pluck, and by that I mean you lift up the hair, you grab the very tips with your thumb and your forefinger, and you pull in the direction that the hair is growing. When you finger pluck, you won't break the hair, and that's important because when you break the hair, it grows in softer and softer. And that's why sometimes people who have been hand stripping, and I say it in air quotes because it turns out they've been breaking more than they've been pulling, and it has the same effect as if you've been clippering it. So in the beginning, you want to learn the technique of finger plucking. I'm holding the skin on his chin and his cheek a little bit to control his head, but mostly it's to hold the skin a little more taut so that when I pull, the skin isn't pulling. The hair just pulls out of the skin. Thank you, good boy. Every now and then stop and give him some gratitude, especially at the beginning. Let him know that you appreciate that this is work. And don't let a Schnauzer fool you. They're working dogs. They can do this job of be still while I gently and slowly pull and pluck the hair. If you have a dog that it's very uncomfortable or you have to work really, really hard to do it, then that dog's not a good candidate. So just a few hairs at a time, pluck and pull. Pinch with your thumb and your forefinger and pull. While you're doing this, there's some other technique that you're learning. I want you to learn good habits because your habits will stick with you And years from now, if you have some bad foundational habits, you're going to have a problem. When you're stripping, the only thing that moves, your wrist does not move, whether you're using your fingers or you're using a tool. Your wrist needs to stay still. So when I pull, my wrist doesn't move. What moves is my elbow and my shoulder. Once I've pinched the hair that I'm going to pull, my hand, my wrist, they're locked. And I just pull. If I twist my wrist, it pulls strangely, and that can break the coat. But then especially if you move to a tool and you're twisting in any way, your tool can break the coat much more easily. So in the beginning, you're going to go slow. Don't try to do it fast, try to do it right. And this is a great time at the beginning to learn how to do this with both hands, because it's awkward for either hand because you haven't learned how to do it. But if you learn to strip with either hand, there are some parts that are more challenging. One side or the other is going to be harder for you if you're right-handed or left-handed. But if you've learned to finger pluck with either hand, then you don't get in that bind as much. And again, to kind of hold him still, I'm holding him gently by the hair on his face on the other side. Okay. You can see I've gotten a little patch going here on the top of his head. And I'm going to use this technique primarily, if I'm a beginner, what I'm going to suggest to you is that you work mostly on their head first and their tail, because that grows the fastest. You'll see the results there the soonest. And if you can keep the head looking neat, then even if the body starts to get kind of bushy and a little out of control while you're learning how to do that, but you keep the head neat, you keep your clipper work up, you keep the head tight. People may not understand the grooming that you're doing, but your dog won't ever look neglected. Your dog will always look like it's being worked on. So in addition to the head, the other place that's good to work because it grows fast is the tail. And the tail requires patience. They often don't like that. Sometimes they try to sit like he's doing. And all I do is I just try to intercept him and change the habit. And it means I have to go really slow at first, and that's okay. Good boy. There, that time he didn't move. And I'm just resetting him. And I'm not expecting him to do other than his reflexes want him to do. If your dog's fussy, sometimes it's because, it's often because you're going too fast, or you're trying to pull too much hair at a time, or your dog may have learned that getting fussy changes the subject enough that it makes you stop and focus on being fussy back. And so they're going to deliberately try to lure you out of doing the work by being fussy. So as much as possible, ignore fussiness and just sort of work with it as much as you can. Just a little bit at a time. Set a timer, 5 minutes. 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes every other day, and you'll actually be shocked at how much of a difference you'll see in a week, see in 2 weeks, see in a month. Now, sometimes you do need to take more hair off at a time. And that's when you would need to use some tools. Before I get into tools, does anybody have any questions about the techniques? Go ahead and raise your Zoom hand so I know you have a question. And if you would like me to go back over something, or you have a question, please let me know. If not, I will go ahead on. And so in an earlier post in the public grooming group, I asked the question, which tools are essential? And let's see, there's a question. It's a very good question. I'm glad you asked that. What about putting powder in the coat? Fantastic. I would have skipped that, and I would not want to. A way to help make the hair grippier is to put a little bit of ear powder in it, or even grooming chalk. You can sprinkle some on your hand, and then you know, lightly put that on top of the hair that you want to pull. Or you can just put a little bit between your thumb and your forefinger, so it's on your fingers, and that makes it easier to grab the hair, easier to pull the hair. Also tends to lift it a little bit more, makes a little separation, so it's easier to see where the tips are and to see which hairs still need to be pulled. So the ear powder is a little bit in the technique and a little bit in the tool category. Now, the main tools that I use as a beginner, or for beginners, but honestly, at this point, I use them almost exclusively myself, are stones, stripping stones. Stripping stone can come like this. This one's a stone one with a nice plastic handle on it, and that's really comfortable for my hand. There's a metal one, does the same thing. It's got a textured edge here. These cannot break the coat. I'd say for a beginner, the stone one is lighter and it's probably easier to work with. For me, the heavier Greyhound metal one works a little easier for me because I get a little momentum up. But I think the stone one's probably good for beginning. And what you do there is, instead of plucking with your thumb and forefinger, you hold the tool in your fingers, and then you put your thumb right up against the edge, and that's where the tip of the hair is going to be. So instead of your thumb and forefinger, it's your thumb, and the stone serves as your forefinger. And let's see. I see. Okay, here's another question. How short do you go? Well, that's a little bit of an interesting question, because it's all or nothing. When you're first pulling, however long it is, you pull it out and then there's nothing underneath for 6 weeks until it sprouts again. So that question, how long should the coat be, really depends on the dog. It depends on your purpose. It depends on your experience, the dog's experience. Even with a show dog, you might want a tight coat, a tight jacket for a show dog, but sometimes you want it a little bit longer too. So I'm not sure that the question is so much how short or how long, but the more frequently you work the coat, the more consistent a length you can maintain, whatever that length is that you choose. Andy, you are trying to bring something to my attention, it looks like.
Yeah, there's another question. What's the best way to clean stripping stones?
I've never actually considered that. I don't clean mine. Because they kind of wear down over time as you use them. I suppose if they got enough body oil or something from the dog's hair or from your thumb, probably just some rubbing alcohol or something like that. But that's not something that I've ever really had as a concern. Yeah. So we were talking about having some chalk in there. We were talking about using the stone and gripping right here. So let me pull some hair so you can see. This is what it looks like after I've pulled it. You see, I've just pulled a tiny bit of it. I've grabbed the tip with my thumb against the stone. And what you'll see when you pull the hair out, put it on a piece of paper. It's hard to tell here, but if you look really close on the pulled ends, you'll be able to see the follicle. And then you'll know you've pulled it all the way out and you have not broken or snapped the hair in the middle, and that you have pulled it out. If you don't pull it all the way out and you break it instead, it won't grow back in hard until it is pulled out. So that's a good exercise when you're starting, is you pluck, put it in your hand, take a look, see if you've got broken tips. And if you don't, then you're doing it right. If you do see that you've got some broken tips or some broken pieces, then slow down, be a little more mindful, and really try to figure out what you're doing that's causing the hair to break instead of pull. All right, Andy, there's another question.
Yes. Do you use ear powder on a black coat?
So that's a good question. And if I am, as long as I'm not showing that dog or not showing that dog imminently, then I do use the ear powder or chalk. I just also know that I probably need to wash it out, or he's going to look dusty, obviously, for a while. So I do use it on black dogs. Just be mindful if you're going to be showing that you don't want him to be dusty from that, and you also don't want to bathe him immediately before, because it'll puff the hair up. But other than that, absolutely, you can use the powder just as much. Now I want to talk about another tool that can be used for maintenance, or to when you're first starting out, since you're going to be focusing on keeping the head and the tail short, but obviously the body will keep growing out, you'll have to do some work there, is I really like the Andis de-shedding tool. It's a type of a rake. The most important thing about the Andis de-shedding tool is it needs to be dull. Dull, dull. Otherwise it will cut the coat. So when I get a new one of these, I literally dig in the dirt with it. If you've heard me talk about Andis tools at all, if you've watched me through any videos, you've heard this before. Go dig in the dirt with it and then keep it in your dishwasher for about a month. You know, take it out to use it, and we keep it in the dishwasher for exactly the reason why we've always been told don't put your knives in the dishwasher, because the hot water will make them dull over time. But we want this to be dull, so it pulls coat instead of cuts coat. So, Andy, I think what I'll do is I'll wait and come to questions in a little bit, and then we'll do several of them. But if I'm going to use the rake, then I'm going to hold the hair, hold the skin ahead of where I'm raking, and I'm going to gently ease the tool in and gently pull through the coat. I don't want to do a lot of pressure, and I definitely don't want to do any kind of fast motion like that, because that'll just break the coat. So then this also gets some undercoat out, which may help lay the coat down, which makes it look shorter because it's laying flatter. So this is something I can do for maintenance while I'm getting to the point where I have the skill and the speed to be able to do the whole body, because at first you're not going to have that. You can see it pulled out a fair amount of undercoat. That's right here. And all of this is top coat. And again, you want to look and see, you know, put it on a piece of paper so you can see those black roots really well, and make sure that you're seeing the follicles there, so that you know that you're pulling and not breaking. Part of why raking is good is it removes coat uniformly, because when you're plucking, you're kind of a little here and a little here and a little here and a little here, or you're working in one particular area, and then that can create a hole. So if you have a large area to work on and you're not to the point yet where you can really actually strip all of it, raking is a nice way to uniformly pull hair throughout. You can do that for a few minutes after you're done with your 5-minute session on the head, 5-minute session on the tail. Just gently and lightly. And that way you always have some coat growing in underneath, and that will make it so that later on, say in a few months, that when you pull hair, you'll always have a nice layer coming in underneath. And I find that layers are how I get to rotating the coat, which is the process by which we pull a little bit of coat on a regular basis to keep the most uniform length. That's a pretty advanced technique, so I'm only mentioning it here as a goal, but it's not what I would be doing as a beginner. But by starting to practice, you start getting ready for that. All right, let's go ahead and take a break for some of the questions, Andy.
Perfect. So I got a few questions here. First one, wash and then strip, or strip and then wash? Is there a way that is more comfortable for the dog?
That's a fantastic question. I love that question. And the answer is really important, actually. Always strip first. It is so much harder to grip clean coat. Sometimes when I'm at the grooming shop here and somebody will bring me a dog for the first time and they'll say like, I even bathed him for you. And in my head, I'm just like, oh no, that's just doubled my work. They're trying to make it easier for me. They're trying to be nice, but they've made it harder. Now that said, if you need to have a clean coat first, that's fine. But then you're definitely going to want to be using the ear powder or the chalk in the coat in order to grip the hair. Clean hair is so much more slippery, and you have to pinch it much harder in order to pull it. So I love that question. That's a great question. And on the subject of bathing a stripped coat, after stripping, it's fine to bathe them, but I always use a medicated shampoo. I always use an antiseptic shampoo. And the reason for that is it's very rare, but it can happen that after stripping, especially if you stripped a lot, when you pull the hair, it opens the follicle up. And so, believe it or not, shampoo can actually go bad. It can go off if it's old shampoo or it's been pre-mixed for a long time. And you won't smell it, you won't really know, but you don't want to be putting that right on those open follicles. So I always use a medicated shampoo, something like the vet might give you, like chlorhexidine, or a more natural alternative, tea tree oil shampoo. Those are my two main go-tos for bathing a stripped coat. If I want to do that afterwards, and I do that a lot here in the grooming shop. After I groom, after I strip, we bathe so they can have a clean dog going home, and we always use the medicated shampoo. Okay, next question, Andy.
Great. Next question. Regarding hair length, isn't it best just to pull out the mature hair that has a tendency to fall out, except on the areas where clipped and stripped surfaces where we thin or shape the line?
Yes, that's getting into a little bit more advanced than the topic, the main focus of this webinar. However, definitely it's a good point that like these hairs that I've been pulling and I've been showing you that are 2 inches, 3 inches long, that's mature coat. You can tell it's mature because it's got the black tip on the end, it's white in the middle, and then we're back to the black band that is where the root is. Now, a less mature hair might only be to here, that might just have the black tips and the white. And when you're still on the hard shafts of the hair, it does not pull out as easily. And so, especially if you're just pet grooming, there's no reason to pull it when it's still not mature. So, if it's hard to pull, you're either pulling too much at a time or the coat's not mature. And it's definitely easier to pull out when it's longer. I find that there's 3 characteristics that to me make a good coat. There's how hard the hair is, there's how thick the hair shaft is, and how easily it pulls out. Usually it's easier to pull out when it's a thick, hard coat like this, but not always. Sometimes there's hard coats that are hard to pull also. And so that might give you a different experience.
Okay, there's a couple of questions about the stone. One question is, where can I buy the stone with the plastic handle? And another person also asks, they put a link in the chat. They want to know if this was a good rake to use. So if we can answer some of those.
Okay, so both of the stones, the one with the plastic handle and the metal one, are made by the Greyhound company. So you can look those up on the internet. There is a website, ashleycraig.com, that has carried these for a long time. But just internet is probably the best way to look that up, but it's Greyhound. If you Google Greyhound stripping stone, you should get it. You should find it. And in terms of other rakes, there are other rakes that work, but the one that I recommend is the Andis. I could divert for half an hour on whether another kind, there are some other kinds like a Mars Code King or some other types that are made similar to them that probably work just fine. But I know that the Andis works the way that I expect it to, and so that's the one that I recommend for that.
Great. Next question. I've had the Andis rake for 2 years now. I didn't know about digging in the dirt. Would you still recommend I put it in the dishwasher?
You know, I don't think they can ever be too dull. I really don't. And the way you can tell if it still has some sharpness to it is if you, for one thing, if you start with your table totally cleaned off so that there aren't any bits of hair, like right now there's bits from the work I've been doing. But if you start with a very clean table and you do some raking, and then after the session you look down and you see little tips on the table, then you know the Andis is still breaking some hair. And then that would tell you, okay, well, let me dull it some more. So, you know, mine get dull pretty fast, but that's because I do this professionally and I run an Andis through 5 dogs a week at least, maybe often more than that. So if you may have a 2-year-old Andis, but if you're only working with 1 or 2 dogs once a week or something like that, then even after 2 years, your tool might be sharper than mine that's 4 months old. So to be on the safe side, just dull it some more. You can't make it too dull. So the duller it is, the better it'll pull and the less it'll cut.
Great. Next question. We still got a few more coming still yet too. So I thought bathing a coat made their hair soft.
So that's kind of an age-old debate. My perception, my perspective is that it makes the hair smooth, which is part of what makes it harder to strip when it's clean. But whether it actually makes it soft is more of a function of the thickness of the hair shaft. So if you have a nice hard coat, and I keep showing you this, these hair shafts are quite hard. They're quite thick. They're quite big around. they're not going to be softened by some shampoo. You know, they're pretty bendy, and softening is not really the issue. And if you have a pet, you're not showing, it doesn't really matter. To me, it's more smoothness. And that question of whether bathing makes the coat soft is more about how it feels to your fingers, or it's an indication that the dog's coat texture is softer to begin with. So that's kind of my take on that particular question.
Great. Next question. If you strip properly, aren't you left with any hair underneath? Isn't it completely got bald?
That entirely depends on how often you do it. So if I let this dog go for 6 months and I didn't pull him at all in that time, all of the hair would be long. And then if I stripped him, then yes, he'd be down to his underwear. He'd be down to undercoat only. However, if I do any work on the coat from time to time at all, then, as I said, it takes 6 weeks for new hair to sprout after you've pulled it. So if I pull a little bit of hair every 2 or 3 weeks, then there would not ever be a time where I would pull it down and then he would be bald or down to the undercoat all over, because there would be coat growing in from when I pulled it 2 weeks ago, and 2 weeks before that, and 2 weeks before that. So that entirely depends on the approach you take. When I first started, when I was a beginner, I often just went through the cycle of let the coat grow out, pull it all down to the undercoat, let it all grow back in. It was a nice length for a while, wait till it got bushy, and then pull it all back down. And in that case, yes, you are going to find more of stripping it leaves you with just undercoat. But the more often you work it, then you're not going to see that. You're going to have a more consistent look. Even though you've pulled the long stuff off, you'll have a short layer underneath.
Great. Next question. I have noticed my standard having a scab a couple times a week or two after I stripped them. I was washing first. Could this be follicles that became aggravated, or am I being too aggressive while stripping?
Well, if you were bathing before you were stripping, then it can't be anything to do with a skin infection, because that happens in the other order. It's most likely being aggressive with pulling a lot at a time. If your dog has a softer coat, this could be more true in something like a mini. Some giants have softer coats also. And it could also be your technique, because I've been saying all along, you want to be pulling at the tips. But if you're grabbing the hair closer to the skin, you're going to get a larger amount of hair to pull at a time. You might get undercoat that's in there too. And then you are more aggressively removing hair in a smaller area, and that could cause irritation that could lead to scabs, especially on the top of the head. If the head has gotten really long and fine and soft, when you start stripping the head, if you pull all the hair on the head, you might find that you get some bald spots at first, and those might get pink or a little tender or something like that. So most likely it's pulling too hard or too much hair at a time and grabbing it closer to the skin instead of at the tips. It's kind of an advanced technique to pull more coat faster, to grab it closer to the skin, but this is beginner level. And at beginner level, I want you to practice always just pulling from the tips. It gives you the most control over what you're doing, and that best outcome, the most comfort for the dog.
Perfect. 2 more so far.
Okay.
Are certain coats better candidates for hand stripping? Mega, super, traditional?
Yes, absolutely. This dog has a really hard textured coat, so he's a great candidate for hand stripping because it's easy to grip the hair. It pulls relatively easily. The softer the coat is, and by that I mean generally that means the thinner the hair shaft is, and almost the stretchier. Sometimes when you find soft coat and you're starting to pull and you're looking at it and you're like, that's actually stretching before it pulls or stretching before it snaps. That coat's not as good. A coat that's been clippered is going to take a lot of work to bring back. It's possible to do it if it's got the right texture. If a dog hasn't had it done in their whole life and they've been clippered, they're probably not a good prospect. Even if they're young, but they get puffy and you don't see the nice banding. Or here's something else about his coat. You know, the bands are really long on his hair. You know, it's hard all the way a good couple of inches. A softer coat or one that's not as good a candidate, it might only be this long before it gets to soft, before it changes over to the finer, where's my camera? To the finer texture. You can see, in fact, pretty easily here that this is quite a bit thicker and then it gets thinner down here. So if you only get this much length before you get to this fine hair, that's not as good a good prospect. You're going to have to work a lot harder to keep it from breaking and to keep it from looking more like a puffball when it gets long. When he gets long, it lays pretty flat, but it could look a little bit more like a puffball. And that actually leads into, I'm going to hold off on your other question for a moment, Andy, unless it's related to this specific question. Okay. Because I want to show you another dog that I want to make sure I do a little demo with, because it's a really different coat and a really different dog and a really different outcome. That answers, again, some of that question of how long should it be? Well, it depends on the dog. So I'm going to give Sumo a little break. He's been a great little dude. Thanks, Sumo. All right. All right. Now I've got my little crazy critter, Rosie here. Rosie was it's a standard, but she was tiny when she was born. And as you can see, I don't groom her as a traditional, typical Schnauzer. Part of it's because it's taken a while to get her used to grooming at all. So I keep her little hair in a little top knot and I let her ears grow out because why not? She's my miracle puppy. But at the same time, she's got a little small, skinny body. And if I were to clipper her, I just don't think she'd look good. So I have been stripping her, but obviously I don't strip her real short. And she's pretty bushy. And that's just how she is. And it's fine. She's one I use the rake on a lot. Every couple of weeks, I just run the rake through, and that's part of how I keep her coat under control. I don't worry too much about if it breaks the hair, because I'm not trying to create a show dog or anything like that. But let me show you her hair. Let me, if I can pull one out. So her hair is shorter, stays coarse, shorter, and goes to this fine stuff faster. And so since for her, stripping is a little bit of an ordeal, but so is clippering because she's a little sound sensitive. I just pluck or rake, but here's a good example. Back there on her thighs, her hair is only hard for 1/2 inch and all the rest of it is wispy. So I have to do that by hand, a little at a time. And so that question of how should it look, it depends on how you want it to look. Really, what it comes down to is you live with the dog. You can make her look however you want. If you're showing, you do have to have a particular look. And if you want the dog to have a real traditional look, then you can. But if you want to just kind of play around with stripping and not bother with the head, like I don't bother with Rosie's head. I mean, at some point I'll probably end up stripping it. I actually had a lot of fun just learning to do little top knots with her and play with it. But I just regularly rake through her coat, and it pulls some and it breaks some, and that's okay because it keeps her in a pretty consistent look. But she has a very different coat. Now, for most people, she probably would not be a good candidate for various reasons. One, she's 18 months old, and we're only really just in the last few months getting her to the point where she's willing to be happy to be on the table at all, let alone for any kind of grooming, whether it's stripping or whether it's clippering. So she's one that you just have to go slow with, but it's certainly doable. Give her treats often. But I'm only pulling maybe 15 hairs at a time. Definitely I use a timer with her so that she doesn't get overwhelmed and I don't get frustrated. But I don't keep the same level of tightness on her. So it depends on what you want for the dog that you have in front of you. I think I wandered a little off the topic there. So let me know and put my 18-month-old Sumo down on the ground, and he's chewing something and I don't know what it is. So hang on, let me find out. Yes, he was chewing something I didn't need him to. Okay, what was the next question, Andy?
I got a few more questions now that have come in. So the next question is, I see coarse and fine stones. Which do you prefer?
Okay, so again, it depends on the purpose. I find the just in general with all the tools where there's a coarse version and a fine version, the coarse version is easier to work with because it pulls less hair at a time. The finer version grabs more hair, so you just have to be that might be where you get in that situation where you're pulling too much at a time and it can be irritating to the dog, or it's more likely to put a hole in. So it depends on your application. That's a fairly advanced question, a little bit outside the scope of this session here. Andy, I'm going to take a break for a moment and then we're going to come back to questions at the end. But I did want to, now that we've gone over some of the very basics of timing, techniques, and tools. No, Sumo, don't chew on that. Let me find something more appropriate for him. There, have that. There you go. What I want to be able to offer for people, and what this webinar is leading into, is that I'm going to have a 3-month-long basics and fundamentals of hand stripping course where we go into all of these details. And I'm going to teach you how to learn from the very beginning skills, getting started. And the goal is by the end of the 3 months that you are very clear on whether hand stripping is good for you, for your dog, what your next steps are. Once you've got that skill set of the basics and the fundamentals down, then that opens the door for things like, maybe I want to try show grooming my dog, or maybe I want to try maintaining it in a certain way or at a certain length. So for that course, I'm offering that in my private Facebook group. It'll be my second run through. I did a course back in January, and what we do is a few times a week, I present some exclusive content there, videos, graphics, blog posts, whatever informational content helps you with the particular section that we're on. And it also includes monthly Q&A sessions. So kind of like what we've been doing for the last half an hour, I offer that in that group once a month to answer any questions that come up in the process of learning, or, oh, I heard this from somebody, can you give me an opinion? That kind of thing. I have a lot of other resources that are available that some of you know about, some of you don't. Most of you found out about this webinar through my public Facebook group, the Schnauzer Grooming Club. Andy's going to post a link to that. So if you didn't come from the group and you'd like to join that group, you'll be able to find it. I also have a YouTube channel with over 50 grooming videos on it so far. I put a new one up anything from 1 or 2 a week to one every couple of weeks. It just depends. My YouTube channel is Dogs and Dharma, and Andy's going to put that link in the chat also. I also have a newsletter, and I guess I'll just have Andy go ahead and put all the links to the different resources into the chat right now, so it's all together for you guys. But a newsletter for upcoming programs, when I have puppies coming, but mostly right now it's content about grooming. And finally, I also offer one-on-one private instruction. And so if that's something of interest to you, you're like, oh, I kind of am this, but I have some specific questions or some specific needs, or you need some specific guidance on a particular dog. Maybe it is evaluating a specific coat and saying, is it worth it for me to put the time into hand stripping this coat? And I can help one-on-one help you answer that question. If you're interested in private instruction, then you can send me an email at strawhatstandards@gmail.com. And I'll set up a consultation for you, free consultation to assess your needs and figure out what my best offering is to help you. I have quite a few different things. I've got the Facebook group, I've got private sessions, and I also have a couple of on-demand go at your own pace courses. So those are all resources that I have for you. This 3-month course in the basic fundamentals of hand stripping is going to start at the beginning of September, and it's going to run for 3 months. So September 1st to November 30th. And there's going to be content for you on grooming every section of your dog, hand stripping every section, the head, the body, the tail, and how to approach it intelligently so that you feel like you're making progress. Because as I said at the beginning, because it takes 6 weeks from when you pull a hair, every hair I pulled today won't even sprout from Sumo skin for 6 weeks. And then it'll take another 2 or 3 weeks after that to get some length on it that is useful. So we're already talking 2 months before you start to see the impact. So by the end of the 3 month, you'll have gotten through stripping your dog to the point where you can start to see the results coming in and start being able to tell if you do need to work on technique and what it is. And that's the main purpose for the 3-month course. And I really recommend it for anybody who wants to give this a try, because so many of the other things, my previous course started at more of an intermediate level, And it was a little harder for some of the people who didn't have the basic experience down yet. So this is the fundamental, the foundation level that you build all of your other skills on top of, will rest on top of that. Just want to make sure that I've remembered all of the things. Oh, about the monthly Q&A, that's ongoing. So even at the end of 3 months, I'm still just monthly. I have a Q&A in that private group for everyone who's in that private group. So once you're in my private group, say you join this class, then any future classes that I run in that private group, you'll have access to them because you'll be in the group already. So that's another perk of signing up for the class through my private group. The 3-month session is $300. It includes the private Facebook access, monthly Q&A, exclusive content. And for the first 10 people who sign up for it, I will also throw in a free 45-minute session to problem solve, troubleshoot any questions you have about your dog, your dog's coat, or evaluating anything that you have a specific question about. So that's some of the basic information about the course itself. Andy, let's see if there's any questions first about the course itself, and then we'll go ahead and we'll go back to some of those other questions that people had about specific techniques. And I do want to respect your time. We've been here for about an hour, so we can keep going for another 15 or 20 minutes or so to try and get as much answered as we can. So like I said, first, any questions that you have about the course itself, let me take them first, and then we'll go back to any specific questions about the grooming itself.
I haven't had any questions about the course other than the links that I posted the first time weren't working, so I'm reposting those links from a different source. So I'm doing that. Other than that, if anybody has any questions, are the classes taped? I'm out of town a couple of weeks, or can I watch them?
Fantastic. So most of the way the course works in the group is I record content that I post to the group that you can access at any time. And by using hashtags, then we can group the content into specific topics that you can search for, and then you can view the content in chronological order. So you can follow along day by day. You can check up on it once a week. You can look into it more longer in between sessions, whatever works for you. And so it's not about missing things or not, because it's all recorded content that stays in the group permanently. When I do the Q&A sessions, just like I will for this webinar, I record it and then I repost it into the group, so you'll be able to access that at any time, multiple times if you want, whatever you want to do with that. Yeah.
Yeah, another person said they sent an email a couple of weeks ago and haven't gotten a response. Should they resend it? Absolutely.
Make sure you sent it to strawhatstandards@gmail.com. It's been a month, let me tell you, and it's quite possible. I've tried very hard to catch all the emails from everybody, but it is possible that I missed something. If that's the case, I apologize. And by all means, please reach back out to me. I never intend to ignore anyone or not return a message. So anytime you haven't gotten a response within a couple of days, please definitely message me again to make sure that I've seen it. I didn't accidentally unflag it or something like that. Yeah, thank you. And again, that's strawhatstandards, all one word, @gmail.com.
Yeah, that's all the questions on the course. I got one specifically. One person asks, could you teach me how to do furnishings on mini schnauzers I'm showing now?
So, certainly this course does not have any, is not going to deal with anything that's going to be relevant to show furnishings on a show mini. Of all the aspects of Schnauzer grooming, the area that I feel the least qualified to give, one of my rules when I teach is I try to do no harm. I try to not teach anything that might, especially on a show dog, set you back instead of set you forward. However, somebody else asked me this question a couple of weeks ago about mini Schnauzer grooming, especially legs. And I made a post asking for people with that experience to step up, and several people did. So if you go back into the public group here, into the Schnauzer Grooming Club, and look back a couple of weeks, and I'll look back for it too, and maybe go ahead and pin that to the top of the group to make that resource easier for people to find. Yeah.
This is Debbie, and I know Marcia Dawson actually responded to that question. She did have minis that she showed in confirmation. So if you see any comments from Marcia Dawson, it'll also zero in on your question.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome.
One more question about the group, about the class. How many classes are in the 3-month course? You might have said, but I might have missed it.
So it's not a set number, but typically in a week, I'll post anywhere from generally 3 or 4 videos or a diagram or something like that. So I try to have 3 or 4 new, unique pieces of content leading us forward every week, plus the Q&A sessions. So it's a little bit free flowing because it depends a little bit on what people, I encourage everybody at the beginning to, post a picture of your dog, a video of your dog, a video of you grooming, anything that will help me to zero in on how I can answer a specific question for you, or after a while I start to get an idea of generally who's in the class and what their needs are, and I can focus the content a little bit that way. So it's 12 weeks of content that's, like I said, 3 or 4 times a week. Yeah. And some of those videos are short, but some of them are long. It just depends on what the topic that needs to be addressed is, whether it's a 5-minute video or whether it's a 30-minute video.
Oh, I don't have a link to sign up for the course.
Oh, that's very valid. Excellent. If you're interested in signing up for the course, because like I said, the first 10 people who sign up for the course, I'm going to give a 45-minute private session to. Send me an inquiry at strawhatstandards@gmail.com. Let me know that you want to set up, sign up, and I'll give you the instructions on how to do that, how to provide the payment, and then to be invited into the private group. So send me email at strawhatstandards@gmail.com to go ahead and register and sign up for the course.
Great. That seems to be all the questions I have so far about the course itself. If anybody has any other last-minute questions, feel free to drop them in. Otherwise, we can move on to some of the other questions if you like.
Yeah. Yep. Let's try to do a few more. Give it another 10 minutes. Let's definitely give you as much as we can. I can tell my throat's starting to get a little tired from an hour of talking, an hour and a quarter of talking. So I probably got about another 15 minutes in me before my voice gives out. So yeah, let's dive into a few more questions.
Perfect. So let's go back to where we were in the questions before. The next question on the list was, my Pepper's coat, the rate just goes right through it. So I was told to use a Furminator to get the undercoat. He has a really good hard coat.
Okay, great question regarding the Furminator. And for those of you who don't know, mine's a little bit old style, but the Furminator basically looks like this. It's back in the day before the Furminator, we used to use a 30 blade to card undercoat out. We would just take one of the cutting blades off and just use the blade itself. And the first Furminator was basically a 30 blade with a handle on it. These work well to get undercoat out if the jacket is short. If the jacket is long, even as long as Sumo's, and certainly it wouldn't be good on Rosie, this will just cut the coat. It needs to have, you need to have short jacket, probably about this long, for the Furminator to be able to get down to the undercoat and card it out. If the Andis rate just goes through the coat and doesn't pull anything, then that means that it's not that dense. It's pretty sparse, so it'd probably be easier to put some chalk in it and do it by hand. Sometimes putting the chalk or the ear powder will allow it to go, the Andis to go through the coat and pull a little more where it doesn't without the chalk. So I have certainly had times where I put a dog on the table that I want to use the Andis on, and at first nothing's coming out. I add some ear powder to the coat, and now I'm able to get a little more coat out than I would have been without it.
Good, good. Thank you. Next question. If there's a lot of hair on the neck and shoulders, do you still grab the tips?
So generally speaking, again, the perspective of this webinar and for this course is fundamentals and basics. And you need to master being able to pluck from the tips. And like I said, if you can use this opportunity to become ambidextrous at this, you'll be so happy down the road. If you continue on to an advanced level, having built that skill is just going to give you so many more tools in your toolbox. That said, again, like I was saying with the dog that maybe had some scabs from pulling, if you want to remove a lot of hair, you might grab closer to the skin and farther from the tips. That's a more advanced technique. You're going to definitely make sure you're holding the skin ahead of where you're pulling, so that you're just pulling skin and pulling the hair, and that it's not the skin coming with the hair. So you certainly can pull more at a time if you're more advanced, if your dog is more advanced and more socialized to it, and you're trying to just remove a whole lot of hair at one time. But from the perspective that I'm teaching right now of the basics and the fundamentals, I'm really encouraging you to focus on identifying the tips, identifying exactly which hairs you're pulling. Literally, I'm looking every time I pluck those hairs, I saw those 6, 10, 15, 20 hairs that I wanted to pull, and I pulled them. That will give you the precision you need. Again, as an advanced practitioner, will give you so many more tools in what you're doing for rolling the coat, or what you're doing for stripping, precision stripping for a show presentation, or things like that.
Perfect. Thank you. Does stripping the hair change what color comes back in?
It can. So way back at the beginning, I talked about, if you have clippered the coat, or if the coat has been broken, you might start to get a fading of the color. You might start to get, like a black dog might start to go kind of silver. You might start to find a salt and pepper dog starts to go kind of more dark all over. And so that's from broken coat. And any broken coat that you can replace with new stripped coat will come in with the fresher color. So sometimes you'll see that like for a dog maybe who's got a growth removed or something, and the vet has had to shave an area, and that's come in a more solid color or a light color. When that gets long enough and you can pull it out again, it'll grow back in either the nice dark black or the salt and pepper will come back. So that's basically what the process is of trying to return a dog with a damaged coat to a dog with a good hand stripped plucked coat, is exactly what you said. Pulling the coat so that you get the hard hair back, and the hard hair has the correct colors, the darker, the more saturated, deeper colors of either black or pepper and salt.
Great. One last question about the dogs, and then a few other about products. Can the same litter have both hard and soft coated puppies? I've never seen ear hair so long like on Rosie.
Absolutely. You can have all kinds of range, just like you can any other conformational aspect, depending on how consistent your genetics are for those particular traits. Sumo comes from, well, Sumo and Rosie are both litter mates, actually. They come from lines that have had hard coats for generations and generations and generations. And it's pretty predictable that they're going to have hard coats. But on their mom's side, there were a little bit softer coat, and some of the puppies had a softer coat. Rosie's hair is long on her ears just because I let it keep growing out that way. She had some nutritional challenges when she was a tiny baby. I mean, the other puppies were 8.5 ounces at birth, and she was 3.5. She was so small, she couldn't even fit on her mom's smallest nipple. So I entirely had to hand rear her from hour one. And so she had some nutritional challenges at around the time her coat was starting to come in. And I think that permanently softened it. She had a growth spurt. It was interesting. I learned something from this. She had the puppy growth spurt. We'd moved her to a fresh goat milk based formula. And so her nutrition was better. And like the coat on her tail and on those areas that grew during that second growth spurt, that hair is really hard. So there is some aspect of it that I didn't know before Rosie that may well be developmental as well as genetic. But the reason her ears are so long and soft is because I never plucked them, and I've never clippered them. Mostly we clipper the face and the ears on the Schnauzers to get that really clean and neat look that's more like what Sumo has. Hers are just like that because as a groomer, I just decided to play with what I had. And I figured, well, at any time I can cut it all off. But while I have it long, let me play with that and see what we both like. And it just, to me, just makes her cute as a button. So I haven't had the heart to shave those ears off. Yeah.
I love that. A lot of us are following your journey with Rosie, and we love it. Thank you for that. So a couple of questions about products. Maybe after you finish, you might post some of the links to the products you use. We'd like that. Another question was, what brand of ear powder do you use? So some people are really liking to know, what you use specifically. Is there a way that you could share that information?
Yeah, I could definitely make a post in the public group about that. I get that a lot. And as far as ear powder, any ear powder will work well, and it works better than chalk because it's meant to be grippy to make it easier to pull that ear hair out. But the brand that works the best, the one that I like the best, is this one. It's the Miracle Care Ear Care Step 1. Again, if you just Google ear ear powder for dogs, you'll get a whole bunch of different options, and this is my favorite one. And I'll definitely post a picture of it in the group, and as well as the other ones that we've talked about, the Greyhound stone, the metal one, and the stone one. Another stone that you can use is a pumice stone, and that's another one that's good for gripping, and eventually, you know, they kind of conform to your hand because they're soft and they give a little bit every time you pull. These are a little harder to find the right texture. That's why I was really glad when Greyhound made these stones, because they're very consistent and reliable.
Perfect. One more question that just showed up. I've noticed from hand stripping my own standards that the ratio of banded colors changes based on the age and length of the individual hairs, and the color patterns change slightly as you strip. Is that your experience?
I'm having a hard time visualizing that question. Read it to me again, Andy, and whoever asked it, if there's a way that you can ask the same question, but maybe with a little bit different words, then I may have a clearer idea.
I've noticed from hand stripping my own show standards that the ratio of the banded colors changes based on the age and length of the individual hairs, and the color patterns do change slightly as you strip.
Okay, I think how I'm hearing that is the proportion does change because that third band here, I've got some of the hair that I plucked before. You know, we've got the tip is dark, and then the middle is light, and then the final band is black, and it stays black no matter how long that gets. So the way the hair lays on itself and layers will change the general lightness or darkness appearing of the jacket depending on how long the coat is overall. And sometimes that's a tip off for, oh, it's time to get to work on it, or but again, that's a pretty advanced topic for this. And I think to answer that real well, I'd probably have to get to see the dog in question, or to have a little bit more of a one-on-one to be able to give more than a super generalized answer.
Perfect. And then the last comment wasn't a question, it was just a comment. Thank you so much for the webinar. I've learned so much, the fundamentals of hand stripping, and this rake is going in the dishwasher. And yes, I have lots of hair tips on the table with my Andis rake, so it's still sharp. Lots of great tips for handlers as well. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm so glad. I've kind of fed you with a shovel today instead of with a spoon. So there's a lot to digest. And I'm glad that it could be helpful. Every dog's a little different, so what the needs are a little bit different from every dog, from one dog to another, whether it's a mini or a standard or a giant. So some of it's a little bit of trial and error, but the basics are still the basics. And that's what I'm really excited to explore with any of you who choose to join me in the 3-month program in my private Facebook group. I'm really excited to offer it. When I had a little bit more advanced course program in the first half of the year, there were quite a few people who needed some more basics. And then just the number of people in the group who have had questions about the basics made me really see the need. On that topic, I want to thank everybody, because let's see, we're almost to the end of August now. At the beginning of July, so not even 2 months ago, there was about 300 people in the Schnauzer Grooming Club group. Just before I came on today with you guys, there's 928. So clearly, this is an area of interest. So I really appreciate you guys trusting me and giving me the opportunity to share my 30 years of experience hand stripping and working with Schnauzers. And I hope that you'll join me in the course. I'm really excited to give those 45-minute free sessions to the first 10 people who sign up. Again, it's $300 for the 3 months. You get the private Facebook, the monthly Q&A, exclusive content, and any ongoing courses will be available to you too. If you'd like to sign up, please send me email at strawhatstandards@gmail.com. And I will put a recording. Once we get this downloaded from Zoom, we will post it in the group so you'll have it to review whenever you want. All right, everybody, I so appreciate your presence and your time. And this hour and a half went by really fast. And I'm so glad that you were here and joined me. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. So Andy, since you're host, I think you can go ahead and close the session.